things like that, thinking win-win, synergizing, and that kind of thing. Um, One of the best books that we've talked about a couple of times, where if this whole world practiced the principles in this book, there would be a whole lot less problems in the world. In fact, I think they would all go away, is my favorite, called How to Win Friends and Influence People. Because so often we talk about what's wrong and so on and so forth, and immediately we're going to be Mr. and Mrs. Fix It and fix this person and fix that problem and so on and so forth, just by trying to make them quote unquote change. And the bottom line is people only change when it's their idea, when they're ready to do it. So what How to Win Friends and Influence People is all about, which is a great book by Dale Carnegie that I recommend everybody get and just print out all the principles in that. It's only a one pager. This tells you exactly how you can respond to the different circumstances in your life. We talked about reacting versus responding. If you can put that gap in there and take your reaction and look at the responses that are in this book, it's a miracle worker for you, and it's really very easy to do.
Absolutely. And again, that's another one of those books that has been around for a century or so, and those basics haven't changed. Now, of course, not everything is exactly the same. And, we've talked about a number of books over the course of the podcast. And I think two of the best that we've brought in that are relatively new compared to these others, but really talk about the same principles in new ways, were The Lean Startup and Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And both of those, while they talked about processes and how to do things, they were also about shifting your mindset to see how these things are done. The Lean Startup really talked about how your failures aren't failures unless you fail to learn from them, and how everything should be an experiment, and the more you learn, the more successful you'll be. Whereas Rich Dad, Poor Dad talked about the difference in mindset of how successful people view money. And I mean, I've heard a lot of people talking recently, given that we are recording this on April 15th, they've been talking about their taxes and complaining about the taxes. And I keep saying, wow, you guys need to read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, because you're looking at this wrong. And that's why you're paying so much in taxes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, the concept there is to pay yourself first. Make sure you're looking out for that first. But he talks about the different ways to do that and how dependent you are. And if you can just start a business through which you are funneling all these expenses and so on, because it's your business too, you can save a whole lot of money just by putting an LLC around yourself and other things that way. Because if you're taking trips and whatever, and you're incorporating business into that, these things that normally you're going to pay with after tax income become deductions for you, and that's one of the ways to do it. So it's
Right. And the same thing applies to a small business corporation, as a C corp. Um, the big difference between that and an LLC, which I don't think they talked about in Rich Dad, Poor Dad so much, but they do in some of the Rich Dad follow-ups called the Rich Dad Advisors. LLC is a pass-through, so you're doing your taxes on your personal taxes. C corp, you're doing a separate tax for the corporation, but now things have changed a bit so that you're paying a lot less as a C corp than you do as an LLC. So that's something else to look at. Following through those basics, but looking at current events and adapting them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's a whole lot of great things out there. The bottom line is we talk about personal professional development all the time. You should always have a book that you're reading every day or be listening to something on audible.com or in your car, because the more that you continue to feed your mind, the better off you're going to be. The bottom line is your mind's going to stay stagnant if you just sit there and don't do anything on a daily basis. And then you're going to wonder tomorrow why things are still the same. And it's because you're not doing any personal development work. And it really is fun. I mean, actually doing this podcast every week forces a little bit of personal development for both you and me, even though we're into it anyway. But focusing on a subject together every week is fantastic. And I've learned a whole lot just by my prep work on topics that I thought that I knew a lot about until I started using the almighty Google to find out even more.
Sure, because when we prepare for one of these podcasts, we're researching the topics we're talking about. When we do the book club, we're rereading, if not, if we've read it before. And a number of the books, these were the first time I had read them. So it really, we are working on our own personal development while we're helping our listeners work on theirs.
Yeah, and also we've had a lot of great speakers on with us too to help us out with topics that neither you or I are experts on. So hopefully, I'm sure that's something that we're working on doing more in the future.
Yes, we are working on having more subject matter experts coming on to talk about what they do. And that's also something we've talked about on the air, is that you're not going to be an expert at everything. So you should be able to outsource things. And I know I've given the example of accounting and bookkeeping. Most people, most small business owners try to do it themselves, but since they're not an expert, they're actually spending more time and money doing it themselves than they would if they hired somebody.
Yes, and payroll services and HR fall into those same categories. There's a lot of companies out there who specialize in these things that not many people like to do, and they know how to do them absolutely correctly. Compliance is a big thing, especially on the HR side of things. And a really smart business decision is to just fix that cost, take those headaches off of your shoulders, and get those things done professionally on the outside, because you can't be a master of everything. And we've often talked about your own time management, and the more time that you put into your own business development and operations as opposed to doing these little things that other people should be doing, what's that going to do for your top line? What's that going to do for your efficiency? So, I mean, it is all related, and it's important to plan. We talk about strategic planning, and that's a huge part of it.
Right. And we've talked about these things not just for business, especially time management, strategic planning. We've talked about the fact that, yes, these are business techniques, but they also work in your day to day life to make your normal everyday life easier. Whether you're scheduling things for work or scheduling things for the family, using the same type time management proposals and software or techniques, whatever it is that you use that makes you feel in control, using it for both personal and professional helps you out so much. And, we've talked about the fact that it's so important to get all of this out of your head and onto a piece of paper or into a spreadsheet or into a calendar, because that way you're not obsessing over it over and over again until it's done.
Yeah, and no matter what topic we're talking about, you mentioned personal, professional, work, and so on and so forth. All it is just writing things down, prioritizing them, and knocking them off one by one. And the more you do that, the better off you're going to be. And obviously, tracking results is really, really important too, which is something that you've done with your organizer. It's so important to have that. And once you do write things down, think about the last time you wrote a few things down when you hadn't for a while. How do you feel? You feel less stressed out? You feel a little bit better going into tomorrow? You absolutely do. So a minute today is going to save you 10 minutes or half an hour tomorrow just by writing it down.
And I mean, writing it down is so important. There's an old Chinese proverb: the faintest ink is better than the best memory. And it really is true, because I've actually done this where I write blogs for our corporate website, and a concept for a blog has come up. I've quickly written it down on a pad, and then walked away, whatever. And then I'm trying to remember what that topic was. I can't remember what it was, but I know all I have to do is go back to the pad because I wrote it down.
Yep. And it's a good feeling that you did that, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
So, another thing that we've talked about relationships and how to develop them and so on and so forth. And, a lot of what we talk about is networking and business and that kind of thing. And so we've had a couple of books that really talk about how you handle yourself in the workplace and how you handle yourself with clients and so on and so forth. And the two that really come to mind that are two of my favorites of all time are The Go Giver and then also The Energy Bus. Now, The Go Giver talks about just helping other people out unconditionally. without expecting anything in return, and great things are going to happen to you. And it's a story of a gentleman who's at work, who's trying to make his quarterly quota, and he's not quite going to make it. And then the bottom drops out of something. And what he ends up doing is calling this coach, who really 180s the way that you look at things. And instead of, I got to go get, it's by giving, the people are attracted to you and wonderful things happen. So that book is highly recommended. And the Energy Bus is all about creating your vision and working with that through people, inviting them to work along with you. It's a very, very fun story about how somebody saved his job in a department and did a great launch at work. So those are two great books: The Go-Giver by Mann, and then The Energy Bus. The name will come to me before the end of this book. So,
yeah, I mean, we've talked about so many really great books. I mean, in addition to the ones we've already mentioned, there was The Greatest Salesman in the World, which was a fantastic story about how to do sales. But more importantly, it was about, also like The Go-Giver, it's about, in order to get sales, you have to give rather than just pushing and pushing to get.
yeah, that is one of the most popular books, well-read books ever, and that's by Og Mandino.
Yep.
And that book is really, really old. It comes, I think, from like the last 1940s or the 1950s. And he's a man that figured it out for himself too, because he was on the edge of whatever before he started writing these things. And the book itself is just amazing.
Yeah, we've done so much research and read so many books to do this podcast. I think, we've probably gained more than our listeners did just being able to learn all this.
Absolutely.
But, when it comes down to it, one of the things we've seen is that there is that constant thread. Everything builds upon what you did last, and it all requires the basics. No matter how much technology you've got or how successful you get, forgetting those basics tends to make you fail. And the more you stick to those basics and the more you remember them, and it's about building those relationships and nurturing those relationships. Relationships will fall by the wayside if you don't work at them, which is another trend that over the different topics we've seen, is it all requires constant care, constant nurturing to make all of these things continue to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if you can do it from a positive foundation, that's the key to making the whole thing work.
All right, so we're coming up to the end of our 100th episode. So over the course of the time, what do you think is the big takeaway that our listeners should have?
In 100 words or less. I'm just thinking it's really just so important to work on that person in the mirror from a positive mindset standpoint, and then put together your plan and just go out and share yourself with others. Everybody is just a wonderful person, and we all have our own talents and so on and so forth. So instead of looking in the mirror and thinking about the things that you don't have that somebody else may have, you got things that other people don't have too. So just go out there, work on yourself, give unconditionally, and enjoy. That's really most important. It's just been really, really wonderful to be able to share things with you and share things with our audience for the last 100 episodes.
Yeah, I think for me, the big takeaway is that, to use a phrase, the more you learn, the more you earn. Keep working on yourself, keep learning new things, and keep nurturing those relationships. Don't try to do everything yourself. Reach out to people and do things together. Look at people as potential partners, not potential competitors or potential customers. This way, when you're doing for them, they're doing for you, and everybody wins. And that's, I think, a big thing, is that success is not a zero-sum game. You can build yourself up while building up other people as well. So I think that's my big takeaway from the last 100 episodes. So you've been listening to the